And it is a different moment. It is a different moment, I would say, than we have ever seen. And you here today, this forum, the title of this forum, your intention in terms of being in this forum underscores what an amazing moment it is. What makes it different? I've seen a lot of change in my life. I was a girl when the civil rights movement started. And I remember being in my parents' home, and every dinner conversation, every time somebody came over, all they ever talked about was the moment that they were in. So I have seen other moments, but this moment really is bringing it all forward in the most fundamental way. That video was about all of the people who are standing up and saying, America will not be what it claimed to be if we don't do full inclusion, full inclusion, full inclusion. It is the most challenging thing that we have ever faced, and the nation is stepping up to it. Sometimes it feels awful. Sometimes it feels scary. And that is what you have to go through when you are really doing fundamental, transformative change. That we are going to be in a different place. We are moving to a different place. But in order to get there, you've got to bring all of the challenges into relief. Once they come into relief and everybody sees them, it creates fear, it creates resistance, it creates conversations that have never happened before, and you literally have to go through what I call a groan zone. And the groan zone can be long, it can be dangerous, it can be loud, it can be shrill. Bad things can happen in it, but it is a groan zone that is leading to a different place. And that is what is so amazing about this moment. That when I think about this moment, it is clear that all of the mistakes that we have made in the past are going to have to come forward, and we're going to have to address them. I just want to share one little story from my childhood because I think it is so important that, and some of you who have heard me speak before have heard me talk about parts of this story, but I'm going to tell you one part that I don't often bring up because it is painful. I grew up in a segregated St. Louis, Missouri. And in growing up in that city, we were the second black family to move on the block. It was what was happening in cities all across America. A new neighborhood opens up and the real estate agents steer black people to a place that has heretofore been white, and then all the white people leave. And that's what happened. We were the second black family, the first having moved in the day before. And I always knew I came from a powerful black family because our moving in caused all of the white people to move out. Now that is power. In the process, though, it's not quite a true statement because all of the white people did not move out. One family stayed across the street, and they had a daughter who was exactly my age. And we bonded because we both loved dolls. And those of you who have children know it's not necessarily true that girls are going to like dolls. I liked them, didn't have many friends who did, but she liked them. So we bonded about that. I went to her home, she came to mine. Though we didn't go to the same school because the schools in St. Louis were legally segregated. There was a wonderful schoolhouse on the corner. She went to it because it had been a white neighborhood and that school had remained white even though all the white people had moved out. So people were still coming from other places. I went to a school 6 blocks away, which was the black school. In 1954, when Brown versus Board of Education was decided, we were too young to fully understand it, but we understood one fact, and that was that we were going to be going to the same school. And I literally remember us catching each other's hands and doing a little jig. Come September, the school on the corner that had been all white in June was all black. And my friend across the street, along with every other white child that had been in that school district's zone, got bused to the suburbs. That was the last time I ever spoke to her. And we were little girls. We were little girls. A huge opportunity had been missed. A huge mistake had been made. Just think what would have happened if that hadn't happened all across this country. We're at a moment where we've got to reflect on all of that. I have all of your disparity data, and I knew I wasn't going to read it, but I have it, and I wanted to look at it because it is so important that when we have this conversation, we are grounded in the realities. I'm not going to tell you the differences between what's going on with people who are black and people who are white, people who are of color and people who are white. You know it. I have been here on many occasions, and on every occasion that has been the topic of discussion, so I know that you know it. I know that you are not proud of it. I know that you want to do something about it, and I am confident that you will do something about it. But as we think about that particular challenge, we have to put it in a context, because it is amazing, which is why you are so troubled about it, that in a community that offers so much to so many, that you have these disparities, and you're wondering why you have them, and you're struggling with why you have them. And so what I hope we're going to do at this forum is get the sense of urgency that is going to take to be able to move forward. And we can't move forward without a sense of urgency and without a sense of everybody being impacted. And we know it, because no matter how serious the problem, until you understand how that problem impacts you, you're not thinking about it 24 hours a day. You can't just think about it in the morning when you read the newspaper. You just can't think about it when you come to a United Way event. You can't just think about it when your place of worship decides to have an after-worship discussion about the racial problem in your community. You've got to think about it all the time. And we'll think about it all the time when we understand how it impacts us. We're at a different moment in this nation. The challenge has never been greater. We know that we are rapidly becoming a nation in which the majority will be people of color very soon. We know that that has happened in many places around the country already. I live in the state of California, and California has been in that place for a long time. Almost 80%. The number right now is 73, but it'll be 80% soon enough. But let me not exaggerate, 73% of all children in the state of California are of color. 73% of all children in the state of California are of color. And while we know that by the end of this decade, the majority of all children in the nation will be of color, it really puts into perspective that when we say by 2043, 2044, the majority of all people will be of color, we know that that is a misleading statement. Because if over half of all children are of color, the population that works, that goes to school, that buys homes, that will lead the nation no matter what the arena, that is getting of color very fast. The fastest growing group in terms of people of color is Latinos, and the median age is 27. The median age for white people is 42. What does that tell you about how fast the home buying population, the educating population, the entrepreneurial population is going to be of color in this nation? The fate of the nation is dependent on what happens to people of color. There will be no democracy. There will be no middle class. There will be nothing to be proud of if the people who are going to be the future are not prepared to be the future that we want. And so there is an urgency. There is an urgency about getting the equity agenda right. And it's not just for the people who are being left behind, it is for the entire nation. When you think about what has made this country strong, it really has been the vast and sustained middle class. The middle class is what has made this country strong, and is what has made this country able to stand on the national stage and brag about its prosperity. We are experiencing a threat to that. And when that is threatened, the lifestyle, the very self-image of the nation is threatened. We have got to get the equity agenda right. What is that agenda? I love that you have the name here. It's part of your forum. So many of you have been to the equity summits. Your state always has the largest delegation at our summits, and I am always just so thrilled the way that people have picked it up. You come to the sessions, you come back, you've been planning in your own communities. You know what we mean by equity: just and fair inclusion into a society in which all can participate, prosper, and reach their full potential. All can participate, prosper, and reach their full potential. The work of equity is to create the conditions that allow that to happen. I was looking at your word cloud just now when you thought about equity, and I saw one word that came up several times, and that was sameness. Nothing sameness about equity. Reach their full potential. Reaching the full potential. If you think about all of the people who are white in your community who feel that they're reaching their full potential, almost reaching their full potential, have the clear path and opportunity to reach their full potential, it's not the same when people get there. It's not the same when people get there. It might be that if you unleash the full potential of some of the people in the community who are being stifled and pushed down, their potential might shock and surprise all of you and go far beyond the potential that people have been reaching who have had the opportunity to do that for a long time. We don't know what it looks like when all can reach their full potential. But one thing we know for sure, it's not the same, but it is powerful. It is powerful, and it is rich, and it brings a lot. When you think about how hard it is to be able to do that, you know that what you're taking on is no easy task. But equity is a really powerful goal, because what it asks you to do is to be serious about thinking, what's holding people back? You know, we've gone through a long period in this country where we've talked about equal opportunity. We've never provided it, but we've talked about it for a long time. And very often in talking about it, we think that we've done it when we say we're an equal opportunity employer. And what that often means is, you know, if you can get here, and if you can be at all competitive, we'll give you an interview. What it doesn't pay enough attention to is, what does it take on the educational front to even be competitive for what's happening here? And do people really have access to that education? But let's assume the person has the educational qualifications, but they're living in a low-income community of color. What that often will mean is they'll never hear about the job. They'll never hear about the job because they don't know anybody in their community who works there. They don't have a hookup, and let's admit it, very often the way we get our first job is through a hookup. I know that's how I got mine, that you know somebody, and that person takes an extra step on your behalf. People don't have a hookup. But if they're lucky enough to have the educational experience, if they're lucky enough to have the hookup, do they have the transportation to get there? Does the public transit system allow them to be able to get to that job? Because if they're of color, there is a good chance that they don't have a car. And if they are able to get there, have they had the exposure to be able to present themselves in the way that people are going to be able to move forward? Equity requires that we look at all of that, because we haven't created the conditions if we're not thinking about it that way. And so equity makes us really have to dig deep. And when we think about the equity agenda and we think about digging deep, it makes us have to develop strategies that we have not developed before, strategies that are going to lead all onto the path. And if we do it right, the benefits rebound to all of us. How many times have you thought about this issue? In cities all across this country, we have curb cuts, those cutouts in the sidewalk that allow people in wheelchairs to be able to get around. Now, we had taken some steps as a nation to stop discrimination against people with disabilities, so that there was this notion of equal opportunity. If you can get there, we'll interview you. However, having a right is hollow if people can't exercise it. And so people in wheelchairs fought to get those curb cuts so that they would have so the conditions would exist so that they could exercise their rights. It started in Berkeley, California, and it has spread all across the country. There are hundreds of thousands of curb cuts all over this country, allowing people to be able to maneuver who have wheelchairs or other kinds of disabilities. But how many times have you been pushing a baby carriage and been so happy you didn't have to pick up that contraption from one curb to the other? How many times have you, like me, been trying to catch a train and you made that train because you could just pull that suitcase and you didn't have to maneuver to try to get around? How many times have workers had their burden lightened, whether they were pulling a wagon or pushing a cart, because of those curb cuts? Those curb cuts are an example of how, when we concentrate on getting it right for the most vulnerable, the benefits cascade to all of us, to all of us. It's not the only example of that. The bike paths that are so prevalent, another street example. Those bike paths are there because of the extreme vulnerability of people on bicycles in traffic. So we have bike paths. When they put in the bike paths, though, the reduction in automobile accidents, not including bikes, was extraordinary. And the reason is because bike paths organize the traffic. Organize the traffic, and organizing the traffic took benefits to all. One of the things that I think of as the gold standard of the curb cut effect is the GI Bill. When the GI Bill was created, they thought, even though there were 16 million people, veterans coming back, they didn't think they'd get more than 100,000 who would take advantage of it. And the GI Bill helped to make the white middle class. I'm sorry I have to say white middle class, because the GI Bill and those benefits did not get to black people. It didn't preclude it in the legislation, but it left the implementation up to local communities, and local communities found a way to exclude black GIs. But it made the white middle class, and nobody expected that to happen. But opening up educational opportunities, opening up opportunities to buy homes, it made a difference. It is the curb cut effect. You get it right with nuance for the most vulnerable, and you get it right for everybody. And we have to understand that equity offers that opportunity. Even though you may not know it, when you get the racial equity agenda right in this community, it is going to benefit the entire community in ways that you can't even realize. Going forward, though, you're going to have to get very specific. One of the things we know that we need is that we need to create, expand, and be aggressive about making sure that people have access to good jobs. That people have access to good jobs, and we need to be expansive in our definition of what it means for something to be a good job. We have to understand that jobs and income are really at the heart of what's going on here. The ways that we have placed people at a disadvantage in terms of education and in terms of employment, it just keeps feeding racial inequity. It just keeps feeding it. It is so baked in that no matter how much you may want things to change, things will not change until the children have the education they need, the young adults have access to the education they need, and it needs to be high-quality education. It needs to be 21st century education. It needs every penny you can muster to make sure that it can happen well and it can happen fast. And people need to have access to good jobs, and every opportunity you have to make sure it's a good job. In Oakland, California, and I'm sure you have something similar to this here because you are a progressive community and you are doing the progressive things. But in Oakland, California, when they finally brought back the Oakland Army base that had been abandoned for 25 years and it's become an international logistics center, but when they decided to start doing it, they said every penny we spend on bringing back this Army base has got to be devoted to equity, and that means racial equity in this community, that the apprenticeship positions have to be available for people who really need them. We have to make sure that we're not using temporary agencies in Oakland, California to do hires. If we've got jobs, these need to be regular jobs. We need to have people employed. It can't just come and go. We've got to make sure that we put a priority on people who are returning from prisons, people who are returning veterans, people who are long-term unemployed. We've got to put a priority on doing that. And we have to make sure that the entrepreneurial opportunities that are going to flow from this international logistics center go to people of color in the community. Do you know that people of color are 3 times as likely to start a business as people who are white? 3 times. That's Asian, Black, and African American. And yet, the opportunities available to be able to tap that extraordinary entrepreneurial spirit just have not been there. They addressed all of those things. And to show their seriousness, they opened a job training center in the poorest Black community in Oakland a year before they were going to break ground for the logistics center to show they were serious, and they're making real progress. I lift up that example to say, yes, we have to think about good jobs, but we have to make sure that with every penny that we're spending, we're asking, how do we make sure that the people need the most get them? How do we make sure they're good jobs? How do we make sure that the people who are most likely to hire people of color, who's most likely to hire people of color? People of color. The people who are most likely to hire people of color get the entrepreneurial opportunities to be able to help the mission that we are all on, because it is such an important mission. We have got to grow good jobs, but we also have to build skills and capabilities. We know that we are becoming a very much skills education-oriented society in terms of jobs. Nationally, by 2020, something like 48% of all jobs are going to require an associate's degree. Nationally, only 28% of African Americans and Latinos have it, only 14% of recent immigrants. In your community, it is a little different. 54% of whites, 40% of Latinos, 26% of African Americans have an associate's degree, but this basically reflects the nation. So we know we have got to step up in that arena. And there's some wonderful models around. For example, in Tennessee, they now have the Tennessee Promise, and they're making community college free. So that a 4-year education is now cut in half automatically, but also anybody who graduates from high school has the opportunity to at least get 2 more years. And we know we've become a nation in which we really need to be talking about pre-K 14 as what we're providing as universal education for all, because that's the minimum that you need. Every child should start school ready to learn, not just those who can afford it. And we need to make sure that everybody at least gets 2 years. But even though I'm proud of Tennessee for doing that, we know that that can only perpetuate inequality and inequity if you don't understand the racial dimensions, if you're not paying attention to make sure that the people who need it most. So the burden on us is tremendous in terms of doing everything with more education, more nuance, more deliberateness to be able to achieve the equity goal. And the other thing we have to do, in addition to building capabilities and making sure they're good jobs and entrepreneurial opportunities, is we have to consciously remove barriers and expand opportunity. Removing barriers is very important. Michelle Alexander has done us all a service by writing and promoting the new Jim Crow. She has teed up a conversation about incarceration that we've been needing to hear for a long time and have. We really need to make sure that we understand it. And I'm getting to the point where I like for people to couple the new Jim Crow with Slavery by Another Name, because it talks about how the penal system was used to expand slavery, people actually working for no pay at all, getting picked up for no reason at all. And you know, it used to be that with that no reason at all, I wasn't doing anything, nobody ever believed it. Thank goodness for cell phones. Thank goodness for cell phones. No reason at all Black men have been getting picked up since the end of slavery. Slavery by Another Name is also a must-read. But what we know is that we can't solve the problem if we don't do something about, one, stopping incarceration the way that it has been going, but we have to do something about people who have already suffered from it. So when we talk about removing barriers, it really is a way to say what happened on the video, welcome home. We know where you've been. We know you've been in prison, but welcome home. We need your genius. We need your participation. We need your leadership. Welcome home. And when you are telling somebody welcome home, you got to go beyond ban the box. Ban the box is an important step, but it is just an early step. We have to make sure that people are getting jobs, that they're participating in the democratic process, that they're coming back to families, that they're coming back to communities. We have to remove that barrier because it is a stain on our society that that is a barrier in the first place. We're only beginning to understand it. It is mighty important. But in removing barriers, we also have to think about expanding opportunity. And one thing that we know in America is that where you live is a proxy for opportunity. You tell me your address, and I can tell you way more about you than I should know. Way more about you than I should know, including your life expectancy. We have to understand what we have done in terms of making legal progress on issues of segregation and thwarting every bit of progress that we have made through a development pattern that has isolated low-income people of color in communities with failing schools, with no jobs, with deteriorating housing, with no public transportation, unsafe. All of the things that we know are important for reaching your full potential, isolating people who need the investments in communities like that, we have got to reverse that. We have got to reverse that. We need a housing policy that is fully informed. And until we can remove the barrier of place, we have not set ourselves on a road to being able to achieve our full potential. I need to be wrapping up, and so I want to lift up something I read just yesterday. Another really good book that I want to recommend is The Defender. It is about the Chicago Defender, just out in this month. It's about the Chicago Defender, African-American newspaper in Chicago that really was a national voice for Black people in terms of raising the issues. The book is magnificent. And early on in the book, there is a reporting of a conversation, a speech that Frederick Douglass made within about 15 years after slavery ended. And he was in Chicago. And he said that everybody wants to talk about the Negro problem. He said, we do not have a Negro problem. And by calling it a Negro problem, we are making it something that we're not going to address. Because you're talking about a problem of those who are despised, or those that we don't really care about as a nation. He said it's not a Negro problem, this is a national problem. It's a national problem, and it is a problem that challenges the nation to live up to its promises and ideals. And until the nation figures out how to do that, there is a national problem. So I just want to leave you with those words that came from Frederick Douglass, oh so long ago, because we're continuing to do the thing that he warned us not to do. Make it the problem of those who are being left behind. The problem is those who are comfortable leaving people behind. The problem is with a nation, a state, or a city that can't figure out that you are not going to be what you claim to be if the thing that defines you is who's being left behind. Good news is we know what works. Every single challenge that you have, you can find a community someplace that's fixing it. It's not a lack of knowledge about what to do. It is a lack of public will to do it. I am so proud of what you are going to do. Thank you.